Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done already, because this will help me out enormously in growing the channel and being able to produce more videos like this one. This episode will guide you through the issues of the Uncanny X-Men published in 1982. Issue 153. This issue starts off with Cyclops, Wolverine and Colossus doing repair work on the mansion, which has been damaged heavily while in battle with the Hellfire Club. We also find Storm and Carol Danvers talking about what had happened, while Carol takes care of Storm's wounds. Professor X and Nightcrawler exchange thoughts and both express their concerns with how to take care of all the damage and how to repair it, lacking the financial means and expertise. At a certain point, Kitty Pryde, the youngest and newest member of the X-Men, pops up out of the ceiling to call Colossus, since it's time for Colossus' sister Illyana to go to sleep. We find out Illyana is scared of bad things happening. Kitty and Colossus joke around a little bit and try and relieve some of the tension, and Illyana asks Kitty to tell a bedtime story. She likes her storytelling the best. Now the biggest part of this issue shows the fairy tale Kitty thought up. There are some noteworthy elements, but I will skip over most of it. Most of the characters involved in this fairy tale are based on the X-Men's looks or personality traits. We see Kitty and Colossus' character fighting side by side. They help out Xavier and Cyclops' character being bothered by crooks. Then they get attacked by an evil version of Jean Grey's character as the Dark Phoenix, an X-Men a very much loved character who has died in previous issues. Kitty then summons her dragon, which is an obvious play at the Blackbird airplane the X-Men use. The dragon is called Lockheed, which will get an additional meaning later on. In between Kitty's storytelling, we switch over to the X-Men in the mansion, eavesdropping on Kitty's story for Illyana. At first it's only Nightcrawler and Wolverine, who over time have become close friends, and they will get joined by Storm and Carol, and eventually by Cyclops and Professor X. When the story is done, Illyana apparently has fallen asleep, so Colossus and Kitty silently exit her bedroom. They are surprised to find the whole of the X-Men team outside, and Kitty is somewhat embarrassed. Cyclops especially thanks Kitty for the nice story, because it featured his now dead lover Jean, with a happy ending. Something which did not happen the same way in real life, so the story and its ending had a special meaning to Scott. Issue 154. When this issue begins, we see Aurora and Scott in the Storm and Cyclops uniforms playing a game in the Danger Room to perfect the control over their skills. It's quite a competitive game, as Cyclops mentions that neither one of them had an advantage over the other with more than 1 point difference. Scott also mentions, somewhat jokingly, how he has to get used to having a rival. Obviously this is a play at Aurora being the team leader now, ever since Scott had left the team. We then switch to outer space and find Corsair, identified as Christopher Summers, who happens to be the leader of the Starjammers, making his way back to Earth after being away for 20-some years. While Corsair is lost in thought about his son, home planet and his dreams of exploring space, he gets alarmed by the onboard scanners warning him of a Shi'ar dreadnought. Apparently he was being chased by them, since he mentions how they have found him. In the next interlude we catch Colossus, his little sister Illyana, Nightcrawler and Professor X moving into one of Magneto's old bases. Nightcrawler is thinking about whether it's a good idea to move into this place, for little kids like Illyana or the X-Men in general. Charles responds with telepathy, and Kurt is surprised by this. Professor X apologizes and says that Kurt's thoughts were so strong that he couldn't help but picking up his thoughts. Charles tells Nightcrawler that with all the anti-mutant sentiments going on in the United States, moving here might actually be safer now. Apart from that, this old base of Magneto has his records and thus presents a nice opportunity to learn about the X-Men's arch nemesis. Nightcrawler tells Professor X that he hopes so, but also that his place gives him the creeps. Next we see Carol Danvers, who used to be Miss Marvel before her powers and part of her memories got stolen, when she almost died in battle with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, specifically Rogue, looking out over the surroundings from one of the towers in the structure. We see her thinking about it, how it might have been better for her to have perished at the hands of Rogue, since it's hard for her to realize she has lost so much and feels very out of place. She's being approached by Wolverine, and he startles her because she didn't hear him. She asks him if they had met years before, and Wolverine confirms they had, and that her partner and Wolverine had done some missions together. Carol doesn't remember any of this, which is very frustrating to her. Wolverine tries to calm her down some, but then gets interrupted by Kitty, who got sent by Professor X to find Wolverine. Right before we go back to Cyclops and Storm in the mansion, we see a short instance of Corsair being really close to Earth and getting shot at by presumably the Shi'ar. Cyclops is preparing a meal for him and Storm and thinks to himself he has outdone himself, but then again his standards are pretty low. While having dinner, they are going through the mail. Storm reads a postcard sent by Kitty, saying how she got sunburned and is practicing her dancing skills to get a part in the piece choreographed by Stevie Hunter. Scott jokes how that's quite a postcard. Storm responds by saying Kitty writes really small. Scott himself is reading a letter by Emma Frost, the White Queen of the Hellfire Club and a head teacher of the Massachusetts Academy, concerning the revoking of Kitty's admission to that school. This refers to an earlier altercation between the X-Men and the White Queen, and also the promise of the White Queen made at the end of the same altercation regarding Kitty's enlisting. Kitty will now officially be with the Xavier School for at least one more year. Storm compliments Scott on the meal he made and how he underrates himself. She also asks Scott whether he wants to reclaim his leadership position on the X-Men team, because of the comment he made earlier about Storm being his rival. He then replies by asking if she wants to give it up. Aurora then says how she's not certain, and somewhat reluctant took the role when Scott left the team, and that the responsibility frightened her. She also mentions that over the months she accepted it and became good at it, but also says that Scott was the best. Scott thanks her for the compliment and says he's not entirely sure he wants the job back, how things have changed and is changing, and that it feels like he's at a crossroads. At that moment, their conversation is interrupted by a loud roaring sound. They rush outside to find a spacecraft crashing down, luckily in a nearby lake. They dive in the water wearing oxygen masks and communication devices and look for survivors. While they do this, Aurora is wondering how they will explain the situation if it ever comes to light. Scott says how she's the boss and she will figure something out. They find and rescue the pilot and come to the same conclusion, namely that it's Corsair, someone they met at an earlier time while they had one of their adventures in space. At this moment in time, Scott is not aware just how Corsair is related to him. Aurora does know, but she made a promise not to reveal that secret. She wonders how this might just be the right time to do so. At that moment, the spacecraft explodes, solving the potential problem of having to explain the situation. We then see the dream or nightmare that Corsair is having, right before he gains consciousness. We basically see him as a pilot of an airplane that's crashing down, with his wife and two sons. His wife, Anne, gave the only parachute to her oldest son Scott and wrapped her younger son Alex in Scott's arms and pushed him out of the plane. Apparently after that, Corsair and his wife were abducted by the Shi'ar, something which Anne did not survive. Later, not so long ago, Corsair and his 4 Starjammers were ambushed by the Shi'ar Imperial troopers. They made a quick decision and sent Corsair en route to Earth to warn the X-Men. The Starjammer members Raza, Chode and Mamselle Hepzibah remained behind to cover Corsair's tracks. He then wakes up the Cyclops and Storm, both in uniform. He apologizes for dropping in unannounced, but is cut short by Cyclops asking him how he got the Air Force dog tags and the locket with pictures of Anne, Scott and Alex. Corsair then tells Cyclops that the tags are his, and the woman is his wife and the kids are his sons. Scott shouts to Corsair how he's lying. Storm chimes in by saying she's sorry, but Corsair is not lying. Scott is being surprised about this, asks how Storm would know that. At that moment, a Sidri hunter breaks through the window. Corsair says they are here for him, and Scott says they'll have to wait until he's done with Corsair. What happens next, while the Sidri hunters are crawling through every door and window of the Xavier mansion, is a violent cat-and-mouse game between the Sidri on one end and Storm, Cyclops and Corsair on the other. Storm's worried about Corsair's allegiance and is concerned for his own life versus his surroundings when he mentions that they could use a good-sized fusion bomb to tear down the Sidri's matrix. She knows that he's joking, but there's also a seriousness in his voice. The house gets ravaged by the attack and we see Corsair wondering about where the Sidri came from, since they are freelance bounty hunters and the Shi'ar would never employ them. Scott is having an internal monologue about meeting his long-thought lost father and not sure how to act. This is being noticed by Storm, who feels guilty about not telling Scott, to try and spare him the hurt, yet in doing so possibly giving him more pain. The 3 of them try and come up with a plan on how to deal with the threat of the Sidri invading the mansion. Storm and Cyclops decide to try and draw away the Sidri from the civilians surrounding the vicinity. They do this by leaving Storm behind, while Corsair and Cyclops retreat to the Blackbird. Corsair thinks this is a ridiculous plan, to leave Storm alone against the army of Sidri, and while Scott punches Corsair in the face, telling him basically the decision has been made and that Corsair should shut up. Just about when Aurora is about to lose a grip on the situation, Scott chimes in saying how they are ready for liftoff. At that signal, Storm uses her elemental powers to create a flood to deal with the Sidri, and in her last breath she flies to the Blackbird. A tactical maneuver Scott would not be able to pull off. As they fly away from the hangar, Scott makes a final pass over the mansion to gather as much data as possible, and sees the mansion is in total ruins, being covered in Sidri. While Scott is telling Storm and Corsair to keep an eye open for the Sidri ship in hope of being able to take it out, Corsair tells his son to take another good look at the Sidri, because they don't need a ship, they are a ship, as we see them all merging together in a spaceship. We then switch over to air traffic control personnel being startled by what they see forming on their radar, and are worried because the unidentified flying objects are heading due New York City. All the while the Sidri ship is in pursuit of the Blackbird, firing laser beams at them. Cyclops tries to outmaneuver their attackers, and while he does so, he tries out the newly installed experimental cockpit's windshield. Scott's mutant ability of firing force blasts from his eyes has a special interaction with this material called ruby quartz, the same material his visor is made out of. In this case, apparently, the composed material the windshield is made out of has a polarizing property of amplifying Scott's eye beams, same as a ruby would with light in a laser. However, amplification or not, it has little or no effect on the Sidri ship. Corsair explains to the Cyclops and Storm why that is and what they would need to have the desired effect. Corsair compliments Cyclops on his flying skills and that he could not have done better himself, while calling him his son. Scott is having none of that and shuts it down by saying his name is Cyclops and how Corsair doesn't have any right calling him differently. Storm comes up with a plan to defeat the Sidri by hitting them from both sides. Storm with her elemental powers and Cyclops with his optic blast. While Storm is flying around, she has an internal monologue, wondering whether their survival is worth the risk it might be to the civilians in the surrounding area, both through the Sidri attack as well as Storm's own attacks and Cyclops' beams. She's also very aware of her being a lot more fragile outside the Blackbird than inside. A helicopter of the NYPD is being attacked by the Sidri, totally destroyed for coming too close and being mistaken for an attacker. Storm does her best to rescue two policemen inside and is successful in doing so. The battle continues and the duration of the fight causes the Sidri's matrix to collapse. The Sidri spaceship breaks down into smaller Sidri hunters and crashes down into a petroleum storage facility. This is being evacuated by the personnel working there. At this moment, Corsair proposes to cause an explosion and kill all the Sidri. This causes some confusion in Cyclops because he didn't know they were alive and he thought they were all machines. He also mentions that he can't kill them. Corsair then responds by saying that he can't have any scruples about this and that they have to act now because he can't allow the Sidri hunters to combine again into a bigger enemy. At this moment, Storm enters back into the Blackbird, and while the hatch is open, Corsair shoots his gun and causes an explosion in the petroleum storage facility. With this situation being dealt with, the three end up into a discussion about the workers working there, the effects on the environment, and the global threat of the Sidri. Corsair can only respond by saying, well, it doesn't really matter how many people might have died, he's trying to save a whole world here. This world, the Earth. Storm and Cyclops then demand an explanation about what Corsair actually means by saving this world. We then see a little flashback concerning a meeting of the Shi'ar Grand Council, which was being raided by terrorist commando forces. Corsair says that most of the Minotors were slaughtered there, and some even executed after they had surrendered. We also see that the Magistrix of the Shi'ar Empire, Lilandra, was kidnapped and that Corsair and the Starjammers were implicated. He also mentions that the trail left by the terrorists led straight to Earth. At this time, a fast battle force, led by Chancellor Araki and Admiral Samedar, set out to immediately rescue Lilandra, and that their forces were already closing in on Earth. Corsair mentions that the Shi'ar will go to any length to save their Empress, and that they don't care about Earth being destroyed. Thanks for watching.